Hi, welcome to the Chinese Island exhibit. The idea for Chinese Island emerged from my thinking about a practical problem faced by my students learning Chinese that I observed many years ago. At the time, it struck me that my third year students, despite having learned Chinese for at least 3 years and being able to read in Chinese reasonably well, were seemingly unable to express themselves confidently or coherently in spoken Chinese in ad hoc situations. The problem was similar for my introductory level students, but this was not unexpected, as they had much more limited exposure to learning the language at that level. I personally spent about 5 years studying in China. During that time, my experience was that I learned as much, if not more, outside the classroom than I did in it. Living in the language and cultural environment provided me with ample opportunities to use the language I was learning from a textbook in the classroom out in everyday life. While there were reasonably high costs to making mistakes, so for example embarrassment, I was being able to make mistakes to go back and think about them and then try again the next day was an invaluable learning opportunity. Most of my students at both introductory and third year level were and are not from homes where Chinese is spoken, so their contact with the
我比
language
较喜欢这里
was
的
and
工作。
is limited
你
to
为什
classroom
么来中
interaction,
国呢？
after class assignments, and tests. Moreover, while spending time in a country where Mandarin is the everyday language would be
抱
desirable,
歉，
this
抱
is not
歉。
something that all students can do for various reasons, nor is it something that can be done during a university semester. There was another factor that influenced my thinking about a solution to this lack of opportunity. The Chinese Studies program at Monash has, for the last 20 or more years, run an intensive summer program at the end of each year where students can spend 3 or 6 weeks studying our curriculum in China. Students eat, live, study, play, sleep on the ground, immersed in the culture and language. For 6 years, I traveled to China and stayed with the students for 6 weeks to provide pastoral care and administrative services. Every year, a proportion of the students would inevitably become ill, sometimes more from hard play than from hard work, and need to see a doctor. To my surprise, even some of those students at more advanced levels would call me, sometimes in the middle of the night, and ask me to accompany them to the university medical clinic to see a doctor. Despite supposedly being at a relatively advanced level of language learning, their unfamiliarity with the process for seeing a doctor in China and the attendant vocabulary, in addition to being sick, meant that they were very stressed by having to deal with the situation on their own. As a result, when designing lessons, activities, tasks for the virtual environment, I had and have two main foci. The first is to utilize the topics, vocabulary, grammar, and cultural knowledge set out in the main textbook. The idea is to keep things as relevant to what students are learning in the classroom as possible and to give them a chance to revise, practice, and consolidate that material in a different context. The second focus was to incorporate aspects of real life situations a student or anyone living in China would potentially encounter, thus creating the conditions for situated learning. On this basis, I wanted to create a virtual environment that included virtual versions of some of the places where these everyday activities would occur in real life. My goal
大
was to
蒜，
have students
大
actively
蒜。
using their language skills in this virtual environment.
辣椒
I
大白
also
菜
included a number
大
of
白
cultural
菜
activities that have play-like elements to them and are less focused on language and more on cultural content. For example, the students can paddle virtual dragon boats up a river and throw virtual sticky rice dumplings into the water to try to find the body of a well-known poet who, according to legend,
您好，
drowned himself in protest at the invasion of his native state in ancient China. After spending about 2 years looking at various platforms, I eventually settled on Second Life. At the time, of all the platforms I looked at, Second Life seemed to offer the best functionality
大
and
白菜
importantly
5块
had
钱一
one
个，
of the biggest
我的大
active
白菜
communities
最
of
好啊，
educators that
你
I
买
came
吗？
across. A hobbyist developer in southern China was employed to build the main infrastructure on Chinese island, such as the buildings and the roads, in a style that was reflective of a range of different places in China. I then filled the spaces in with the objects and scripts that were needed to enable the environment to provide the functionality needed
猪
for
肉
our task-based
猪
learning
肉
activities. For me, one of the keys to
豆腐
developing meaningful and hopefully useful activities for students was providing them with opportunities to use their language skills to interact communicatively with a range of virtual characters who played key roles in each of the different activity
请
scenarios.
给我看看你的护照
As a result, a series of non-player characters or NPCs were developed that could communicate with students through voice, text, and gesture, as well as perform other functions like accepting payment and then handing over the item paid for, etc. These NPCs have gone through a number of iterations to where they are today, and I am continuously improving their functionality over time. Developing the virtual environment, the interactive NPCs, the tasks and activities, and the
今
assessments
天我
has
晚上有
provided
去
me
北
with
京
many
的火
opportunities to
车
carry out
你要明
and
天几
publish
点到北京
research
呢
on a range of different aspects of this learning approach. Part of this research has been looking at student reactions to this approach, both formally and informally. Formally, our research has shown, for example, that learner anxiety or foreign language anxiety is reduced when students interact with our virtual characters, although the levels of reduction depend on a number of factors. Informally, every semester, students are asked by the university to fill out surveys on their courses and instructors to provide feedback on and evaluation of them. Over the last 15 years, the feedback has been fairly consistent. In rough terms, about 30% of students really enjoy the Chinese island lessons, 30% are ambivalent, and 30% don't like them. Mind you, the percentage of students who actually do the surveys
往
is
里
quite low.
面走一点，医生
While
在门诊
originally
室
we offered
门诊
activities
室
on
左
Chinese
边
island to
右
both
边都有。
introductory level and third year level classes, nowadays we only offer them to introductory level students as I no longer teach the third year classes. We have now started to look at
您好，
integrating speech recognition for student interaction with the NPCs, whereas previously students would type their input into the NPCs who would respond in audio and text.